This morning, the final full week of the legislative session. The House in recess until this afternoon, hoping that forces the state Senate to act. And several big bills hang in the balance. Texas Republicans celebrating the heartbeat bill, but 2 years ago they said it was not a political priority. So what changed? One of our questions for the bill's author, State Senator Brian Hughes. A rare television interview with the CEO of Vistra Corporation, the largest generator of electricity in Texas, on whether state lawmakers will pass anything to prevent the devastating outages we experienced in February. And no vaccine yet for elementary-age children, so should they keep their face masks for the fall? We'll speak with the U.S. Secretary of Education from Washington.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. I'm Jason Whiteley, and as we do every week, let's start our program here with the top political headlines across Texas. The Texas House and State Senate are clashing in the final days of the legislative session. The House went into recess until this afternoon, refusing to consider Senate bills until the Senate takes up House legislation to fix the power grid, among other things. Keep an eye on this week, and we'll get into it a little later in the program as well. 3 Texans got in trouble in Congress for not wearing face masks on the House floor. Congressman Louis Gohmert from Tyler and Chip Roy from Austin got warnings, but Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne there from Irving, she got a $500 fine since this is the second time she's done so. All 3 are Republicans. Members of the House must wear masks until everyone in the chamber gets vaccinated. And an update to an issue we have spent a lot of time discussing on this program recently, the shelters in Dallas and San Antonio for unaccompanied migrant children. They will close in the coming days, not because they are empty, but because a big shelter opened in El Paso at Fort Bliss, big enough to hold all of them. This is the final stretch, as we mentioned, for the Texas legislature. A week from Monday, it adjourns. Our first guest is behind some of the biggest conservative wins of the session, but at least one high-profile bill that he championed might not make it into law after all. State Senator Brian Hughes represents Northeast Texas from Texarkana to Tyler and spoke to us from his office at the Capitol. Senator, thank you for the time. Let's start out with the heartbeat bill that's been making so much news over the past few days here in Texas. 2 years ago, state leaders here in the Republican Party said they did not think that this was the highest priority at the time because it was something that would ultimately be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. My question to you is, what changed?
A couple of things have happened, and you're right. It's obviously a big deal. Texas has been a leader in pro-life legislation, and there was a thought over the last few years that until the Supreme Court was right, it wasn't the time to send a bill that they might rule against. They might make the law worse. They might come up with something that was really bad. And so there was a big discussion about that. But I think everybody realizes now a dozen states have passed heartbeat bills. And so it was time for Texas to. And so we looked at other states' bills. We looked at Supreme Court opinions, Fifth Circuit opinions. We got a lot of smart lawyers and folks in the room and came up with a really strong bill. We believe this is, not to be arrogant, we believe it's the best heartbeat bill passed in America. We feel good about it.
Senator, there is a clause in here that allows anyone to sue an abortion provider that breaks the new law. They don't even have to live in Texas. I believe that you personally put this in the bill. So the idea is that the public should enforce this law. But to me, that seems really ripe for abuse, considering the GOP is really trying to clamp down on frivolous lawsuits.
So, Jason, I'll say 2 things about that. One is, we know that many district attorneys around the country, even in Texas, Dallas County, Fort Bend County, a number of our urban counties, where the district attorney has said publicly, you can pass a heartbeat bill if you want to, but I will not enforce it. Other states have had the same problem. And so that's a concern when an elected official says, I'm not going to enforce the law. So that's one reason we like public civil enforcement. And this is ground that's been plowed before under current Texas law, under Medicaid fraud, for example. Any person who discovers Medicaid fraud can bring a civil case to bring that forward. The Chick-fil-A law, Senate Bill 1978 from last session about your religious freedom, that also allowed any person to bring a civil action. So it's not a new concept in Texas law. And if the elected officials won't follow the law, we'll empower the people of Texas to do it. And we think it makes sense.
Let's talk about the other high-profile bill you have moving in the Senate. That's already moved in the Senate and in the House as well, too. This would make changes to the state voting laws. The House, we watched, watered down what you and your colleagues in the Senate passed. Two questions for you on this. When do you expect the conference committee, the group of senators and representatives, to have a final discussion on this and really get something pushed through? And in your opinion, what must that include?
You bet. Senate Bill 7 is that omnibus accessibility and security bill that the Senate passed. The House had a different version. And when they put the bills together, a lot of the House version made it in. But now that we're in the conference committee, everything that was in Senate Bill 7 and everything that was in House Bill 6 will fit into that final report. So I realize that we're here Sunday. It's the first day of the week that we don't think of the work day starting till Monday. But I believe this coming week, you're going to see something come out of the conference committee. This is a strong bill. And again, it's about making it easy to vote and hard to cheat. There's going to be details to wrangle out, but I think the big stuff that people care about is going to be in the bill.
Senator, you came on our program early on in the session here and talked about another idea you had, and this is an idea you had last session as well, too. It's Senate Bill 12 this session. This would essentially let any Texan sue social media companies if they get kicked off or censored on there, such as, Facebook and Twitter. The governor supports this, but this is a bill that hasn't been able to get any traction. Why aren't your Republican colleagues pushing this?
It's been something, Jason. I'll tell you, we like the bill. We think a lot of Texans, we know a lot of Texans care about it. As you said, the governor came to my district just for that purpose. I can tell you this, the governor's been on the phone this past week. Personally, he's called me, he's called multiple members of the House to say, I am for this bill. I want this bill to pass. It's a priority. So where we are right now, the bill's through the Senate, through the House committee, and it is now in the calendars committee. That's the committee that decides what bills go to the floor. So here in the final stretch, Senate Bill 12 is alive. And so we'll know, again, by the end of this week, what's going to happen. The bill can still pass. And again, this is about free speech, right? And holding social media companies accountable when they censor your free speech. So I'm disappointed the bill has taken this long, but it's still very much alive.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Let's refocus for a moment on that question that I asked Senator Hughes. Republicans say the heartbeat bill was not a priority 2 years ago. So what did change in that time? Almost 50 years later since Roe v. Wade, is the tide shifting against that landmark ruling, especially since there is now a conservative majority in the Supreme Court? Or is this more about Greg Abbott getting reelected? Ross Ramsey is the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune in Austin, as always. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well up here. What's this all about? Because it wasn't a priority in 2019. Here we are 2 years later, and it is. Is this something to run on?
I think all of the things that you mentioned are part of this, but the first thing in a legislative measure is, do you have the votes? 2 years ago, they didn't have the votes. Now they do have the votes, obviously, and, they took advantage of it when they got it. You've also seen a rightward shift in the Texas Republican Party. After the last election, they're less worried about Democrats than they are about other Republicans. And as you say, the tide seems to be shifting a little bit with Trump's appointees to the Supreme Court and the chance that Roe v. Wade is up for a challenge. So, we may be moving into different times here.
And speaking of challenges, Governor Greg Abbott's going to face one from the right, from a couple of people, Chad Prather and Don Huffines. But so is Attorney General Ken Paxton, the land commissioner. George P. Bush is running against him. How brutal is that one going to be?
I think it's going to be pretty tough. I'm old enough to remember when the Democrats did this. The conservatives and the liberals and the Democratic Party had these big fights and then ran over the Republicans. Now it's different. The Republicans have these big fights and then go run over the Democrats. And I think the Republican primaries in 2022 are going to be tough. And I think that's part of the reason why you see so much conservative legislation getting a push in the Texas legislature right now.
Likely so. Ross, back to you in a moment. Thank you. Coming up, a rare television interview with the CEO of Vistra Corporation. His company, the largest generator of electricity in Texas, and Kurt Morgan has been out front trying to get bills passed to prevent the deadly power outages from February. And there is not a vaccine yet for elementary-age school children, so should they keep their face masks on for the fall? We'll ask the U.S. Secretary of Education. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. Welcome back to the program here. In these final days of the legislative session, Texas lawmakers are moving two bills that we are watching closely. One of them would map or identify
critical energy infrastructure like power plants and the natural gas supply that they need to operate. The other bill would require them to weatherize so we don't see the failures again from the freeze in February. Vistra Corporation is the largest generator of electricity in the state, and its CEO is Curt Morgan. He has been out front from the very beginning pushing leaders to make substantive changes and spoke to us in a rare television interview.
Mr. Morgan, thank you for the time. We appreciate you joining us here.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be here.
The legislature is closing in on its final week. Do you think state lawmakers have adequately addressed this problem to prevent it from happening again?
Well, not yet, but they are getting close. And I commend them because I've been in some of the hearings and I've watched most of them. They've done a really good job and dug in like they never thought they'd ever have to on energy issues. And they have, I think, two very good bills that are really close. They're inching toward the finish line that I think will address the big issues.
You sound pretty confident, though, considering there is still another week to go in the session.
I just think it's too big. It's too big. It's about the people in Texas. It's also about the economy in Texas. We have the number one economy in the country. Governor Abbott's done a heck of a job bringing in companies. But when I go to a meeting, a chamber meeting, and I hear Texas Instruments say, we're thinking twice about putting in a semiconductor plant because of electricity. We can't miss on this one. We have to have electricity. It is fundamental to everyday life for businesses and people alike. And when it's that big a deal, it's my view that elected officials will come together and do the right thing.
Have you heard that from Texas Instruments?
I did hear that. I didn't hear them say that they were not going to do it, but they said it made them think.
We saw you as the first witness to testify in a House committee. You've since written op-eds for the Dallas Morning News, for the Houston Chronicle. Why are you specifically coming out so strongly, taking a position on this?
Well, look, I think we did something that I thought I would never see in my career. We took a product, electricity, that we all wake up with and we take it for granted, which I am fine with. That means we're doing our job. And we create a situation where people are now worrying about whether they get electricity or not. And that should have never happened.
There was a lot of focus on reforming ERCOT, changing the way ERCOT is made up, a lot of focus on the Public Utility Commission, both of which oversee electricity in the state. There hasn't been the same focus on the Railroad Commission. Are lawmakers missing the boat on that?
That's a complicated issue with the Railroad Commission because of its relationship in the Constitution of Texas. I would only say this, that I'm still looking for what entity in the state of Texas that has oversight and regulates the gas of price on the intrastate gas pipeline system. There isn't anybody. And we have a market monitor and we have an enforcement arm in the PUC that looks at every single transaction in the electric side. And there's just not symmetry there. So I do believe that we need different type of regulation on the gas business inside the state of Texas. I think it should be looked at, and it ought to be similar to what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the rules that they have in place for the interstate gas pipeline system. So yeah, I don't think there's symmetry there, and I think that's part of the issue.
Mr. Morgan, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Let's shift off to education for a moment here. Texas public schools are about to get billions of dollars from the federal government, $12.4 billion to be exact. This money makes up for the losses that our public schools saw during the pandemic, but questions are coming along with that cash, and we had some for the new Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona. Mr. Secretary, thank you for the time. I want to ask you about this money that is going to schools across the country, but Texas in particular here, $12.4 billion going to Texas schools K through 12. The big question that a lot of people have when they see an influx of money like this is, how do you make sure that this money is going to the classrooms and the students who need it, the students at risk, disabled students, homeless students, et cetera? How can you make sure that they actually benefit from it?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Glad to be here with you. And you're absolutely right. This is an influx of money. This is unprecedented. And it's critically important that we make sure we're transparent with where the money is and how we're spending it. You know, part of the plan for us was to ensure that states were communicating with us what they were thinking. And two things that were not negotiable are, number one, ensuring that there's an equity lens. We know the pandemic hurt us all, but there were some people that were impacted much more than others. So we want to make sure that these funds are used to equalize the playing field, if you will, and provide those support for those students that were hit the hardest. So that's number one. Number two is stakeholder engagement. We expect all communities to bring in to the conversation the perspectives of the various stakeholders, including families and students, to make sure that the money is going toward not only the students that got hit the hardest, but in ways that they need help.
Now with schools reopened and people making plans for the fall, should school districts allow kids to return in the fall without masks, without protocols, in your opinion?
You know, I'm going to lean on the updated CDC guidance. And right now, it says we should be having our students wearing protective gear and our staff. And I think what we found too, I was a commissioner of education in Connecticut. We had school districts open. My children were fortunate to be in school since day one with masks, with those mitigation strategies that were recommended by the CDC. And thankfully, we didn't have spread in schools. And in fact, the transmission rate of COVID in schools was less than the community, because we knew that students, when they were in school, they were following those mitigation strategies. And it's critically important that the adults follow the science to make sure that we're listening to what the CDC experts are saying. You know, this is a health pandemic. So yes, it's important to reopen schools, but it's critically important to do so in a way that's conducive to ending this health pandemic.
Mr. Secretary, we appreciate the time.
Pleasure to be with you.
So speaking of reopening schools, did Texas schools open too soon last fall? A brand new study this month says yes, and doing so led to more than 43,000 additional cases of COVID in Texas and 800 additional deaths. On the latest episode of Y'all-itics, we got the researcher on the line and he laid out his findings for us. If your phone is handy, you can grab this episode to listen to later. Just aim your camera at the QR code on screen and it will open a window taking you directly to this episode. We drop brand new episodes of Y'all-itics coming up every Tuesday. When we come back here, though, that political standoff between the Texas House and State Senate, are Republicans willing to let bills die over this? We'll begin right there, next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back with us from the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA, joins us each week for this segment as well. We'll also start with you, though. The House is coming back into session this afternoon after taking a few days off in protest of the Senate not hearing any House bills. These ploys seem to work, you know, in the past, especially with the clock ticking. What do you expect to happen? Are they going to all get together?
I think they'll get together. You know, it's hostage season at the end of a session, and they're taking hostages and saying, "Hey, if you don't pass my bill, we're not going to pass your bill." At this point, it's saber rattling. As you run out of time, though, you know, we've just got 6 or 7 days left. It gets more and more serious. I think they'll pass the big stuff. They've got a special session coming up in the fall if they don't.
Indeed so. And Bud, some of the big stuff still on the line is the energy reform, the power grid changes.
Well, what's going on here, what you see in all the conservative legislation, the heartbeat bill, is that next year's primary will be late, probably in May. The runoff will be pushed into July. It'll be a very small turnout in the runoff, in a midsummer runoff. It'll be only the most extreme voters at either party will be voting. And so they're passing some legislation to appeal to those voters.
This is all about re-election. I mean, clearly that's in the crosshairs for them, Bernadine. But are the House leaders or Senate leaders, as Patrick or Phelan, willing to let any bill die, do you think?
I don't think they're willing to let the bills that are their priorities die. Now, the question is, will they have enough time to get those bills through? Because you still have the Hart bill that has not been made into law. So I think that they're not willing to, but keep in mind that this is politics.
Yeah.
Because each session, they run out of time and certain bills die. But the question is, are they willing to let the ones that are their priorities die?
Yeah, the heartbeat bill did get signed, and the power grid is still one of several still hanging in the balance there too. Ross, I want to shift gears and talk Congress for a moment here too, because we saw the headlines the other day about 3 Texas Republicans getting in trouble on the House floor over masks, face masks, trying to make a point. Louis Gohmert, Chip Roy, Beth Van Dyne. What's the? It's interesting that how that unfolded to start with, but are they going to make any changes on that?
Well, I think we're having a little culture war moment, and we're also having a moment of shifting. At the beginning of this, they were telling us, you need to put on masks, and now they're telling us maybe you don't need masks all the time. And in both cases, you have a lot of people who are sort of resistant to the advice. It's different people this time, but it's kind of the same story.
And the other news, of course, Bud, is Van Taylor from Plano and Tony Gonzalez from San Antonio also voting with Democrats to set up a commission to investigate the January 6th insurrection. The other news out of that, well, why would Republicans join the Democrats in this? Are they in politically vulnerable seats?
Van Taylor, we've had him on the show. He's a good guest. He says that he wants Republicans to be there and be part of it and be sure that the commission is fair and square. That's his explanation. A lot of his voters feel like that they're upset that he would even hear of such a thing, but he has a Republican Party explanation.
Yeah, and Bernadine, it does kind of seem politically risky on this. Is it surprising to you to see that headline?
No, because keep in mind, he has reached across the line before, across the aisle. So it is not surprising that he did it in this instance. And he is saying that he would like to be part of making sure that everything is done in a fair manner. And I'm glad that you did correct me, because the heartbeat bill did get passed, but there are still priorities still left to get approved. But I don't think that Van Taylor has a problem.
Good deal. Guys, thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. Of course, we'll be watching to see what happens in the remaining 8 days. Session ends a week from Monday. We'll be back here next week to take you inside Texas politics and hope you can join us then. Have a good week.